Hey everyone, I'm Kenton McDaniel, and the title of what the conversation I want to have today is Quantifying Cyber Risk in Real Dollars. So, finding a way to communicate effectively with executives and other business stakeholders what the amount of remaining risk is. So, again, I'm Kenton McDaniel. I love hacking things. Some of my favorite things are cracking passwords, privilege escalation, and container escapes. I love changing scope. So, the question is, why quantify risk in dollars? And speaking the language of the business is incredibly important. So if we work in the information security industry, we work for some sort of entity, and whether that entity be nonprofit or whether it be for profit, money is always a part of the equation. Being able to quantify the risk that we're trying to either mitigate or address in dollars helps us speak the proper language to executives and other stakeholders for what we're trying to minimize. So what is risk? The idea of risk is something that remains unremediated after activities that we do. It could be due to technology that we have in place. It could be due to processes that we have in place. The idea of quote-unquote cyber risk is mainly centered around people, processes, and technology. So remediating everything is not going to happen. I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute, but understanding what your risk is the first key to understanding what you want to do to mitigate that risk. So threat intelligence is one way to get a great understanding of risk. Here's some good free things that I recommend for threat intelligence. In my opinion, the best sorts of threat intelligence is still Twitter. Some people say InfoSec Twitter is dead. I disagree heartily. I think it's still the best source for threat intelligence. CISA does a really good job of giving out their known exploited vulnerability list. VX Underground is fantastic. Get all your malware from VX Underground. It's free. Don't ever pay for malware. And the DFIR report. Has anyone ever heard of the DFIR report? If not, you should go there like immediately. Sorry, I had to see if there are any hands. You should go to the DFIR report immediately. It's a fantastic resource. Open source threat intelligence is fantastic. So the old risk quantification, which a lot of places use, everyone should be pretty familiar with this, critical, high, medium, low. What does critical mean? Critical means bad. What does high mean? High means also bad. And what's medium? Bad. And what's low? Also bad. So there's no real, I mean, you say critical, oh, we probably want to patch that as fast as we can, right? But what if it's a critical vulnerability on a device that's completely segmented and has no valuable data? Is it still a critical vulnerability? Well, I mean, maybe it's a critical vulnerability, but the impact is low. So classifying things only with critical, high, medium, low doesn't let you speak the language of the business so that you can effectively communicate which risks need to be mitigated. Because you can't mitigate them all. You have to mitigate the right ones to be effective. So my proposed change, and I'm not the only one saying this, I'm not some kind of thought leader. So the proposed change would be, let's do it in dollars. Are we ever going to be 100% accurate? No, we won't even be, I think we can get in the high 90s percentile of accuracy, but do our best to quantify the risk we're trying to address in dollar amounts that mean something to the entity that we're working for. When I was prepping for this, what I've learned is you have to have a good knowledge of what the entity makes, number one, and or spends, number two, if you're not a for-profit company, to be able to quantify what the risk is. You can't just pull numbers from a report and expect it to be true for every entity because it's not. The costs vary. And most reports always say that, right? They're always like, the average cost of a breach, I think the latest one I'm referencing in this presentation says something like $4.5 million is the average cost of a data breach in 2022 and 23. And that's great, but that's not the case for everyone. So understanding the entity well enough to be able to understand what the true impact to their bottom line is key to being able to give them a risk assessment in dollars. It sounds incredibly difficult because it is really difficult. So it's not easy to do this, but when you get there, it can make the conversations much quicker. Dealing with people who mostly deal in dollars, communicating technical things can be tricky sometimes. And I know at least it is for me. So communicating overly technical things is much easier when you communicate it in business language. So we're going to do a series of thought exercises, and I'm going to ask for some audience participation here. And we're going to do a series of thought exercises. So you are now the Chief Information Security Officer for Pretend Corp, LLC. They have an Active Directory domain with 1,200 computers joined to it, Microsoft 365 tenant with 100 endpoints, so every person has a lot of computers, or they've got a lot of servers, either one. They make a revenue of $100 million with $5 million in profit, so they're not even performing really high in that SaaS revenue to profit model, but they are making some money. They have no central incident response team. They do have EDR and antivirus deployed to all of their 1,200 domain joined computers. No email protections. They've never done anything other than Microsoft 365 baseline. They're privately held, so private equity. And they are a social media influencer view botting. Is everyone familiar with what that is? So like if you're trying to get partner on Twitch or you want your YouTube gold play button, you can go out and buy view bots to boost your score, get your partner status. So that's what this company does. That's what Pretend Corp does. And they have no security awareness training for any of their employees. So you're the CISO. Congratulations on your appointment to CISO of this awesome Pretend company. So we're going to go through some basic thought exercises here. So we've got some numbers, right? They make $100 million a year, $5 million of that is profit. So quite a bit of overhead. On what? Who knows? View botting's tough. So tough to turn a profit when you're view botting. So thought exercise number 1, they have a server that houses non-critical data about reviews. So if I purchase some view botting, right, and I want to leave a review for Pretend Corp, best view botting ever. So, but they're anonymous reviews. The data's not tied to anything. The ports they're exposing are 80, 443, and 3389 on remote desktop. So those are exposed to the internet on this machine. The password is 12 characters with complexity. There's only one user on that machine. It's the administrator user. But that password isn't the same as any domain accounts for Pretend Corp. So I can't get into any email or anything with that password. It's not connected to the domain or work group. It's just sitting in pick your cloud hosting provider of choice, just sitting there with those things open to the internet. And it can be re-provisioned in under 2 hours. Through infrastructure as code. Excuse me. That's bad feedback, I'm sorry. So our risk analysis. So we hear RDP exposed to the internet. Who immediately thought critical and high? Raise your hands. Me too, right? But when you get more information, would you re-rate this as critical or high with this more information? What would some of you rate this, knowing the rest of the information? Yeah. Low? Okay, good. Anyone else? You said low because there's no real data on there that's valuable. You can't use the information you get from this machine to go anywhere, and we can re-provision at will. I would agree with that. I would agree the risk is downgraded significantly. So how do we send this mixed message to the executives? Because the first message we're sending is RDP open to the internet is bad. Don't do it, right? We're sending that message because it is bad. Don't do it. But at the same time, we're saying, okay, your reviews portal with RDP open to the internet is a much lower risk. So we're sending sort of a mixed message, but not really. So instead, let's communicate the risk in dollars. And man, I got something in my throat. I apologize. So I took a stab at it, and I said, the risk is that someone gets in, brings this machine down, maybe $50,000 of risk. That's the time it might take for us to restore this to service. So it's still a risk, but it's not 4.5 million, which is what IBM and Ponemon said was the data that I'm using said that's about the top that you pay, or the average, that you pay. So the risk is a lot less. So what remediation can we recommend? Self-host this machine. Why is it on a cloud provider? If we're going to expose AD and 443, great, but if we need to do remote management, move it inside, or just turn off remote management, use cloud-native APIs to do all that. That dramatically reduces the risk. AD and 443, sure, there's going to be commodity attacks against all your web servers, but we're dramatically reducing that. So our thought exercise number 2, Pretend Corp has 60 domain administrator accounts. How many users do we have? Does anyone remember? we have 1,200 domain joined computers. We have 100 users. How many of those are domain administrators? 60. So 60% of our users are domain administrators. That sounds average for this type of company, in my opinion. I don't know. But so Pretend Corp's doing not too great here, right? It's easier for their devs and DevOps to be domain admins. I mean, it is easier, right? And they do have a minimum password length of 12 characters, but everyone is also a local admin on their machine. Does it really matter when 60% of your users are domain admin if they're all local admin? At that point, no. I mean, it's just noise, right? Because when everyone's a domain admin, no one is. So what's the risk here? The risk here is very substantial. Should be a very straightforward analysis on this risk. We can essentially wipe every single bit of profit away that Pretend Corp makes with the risk that we're carrying here. So they're making $5 million in profit. We can wipe away an average of $4.5 million of that. We're essentially saying you turn no profit because of this risk. But now instead of saying this is really, really bad, stop doing this now, we're saying we're wiping clean an entire year worth of profits if something happens because it's that easy for the attackers. So what's our remediation? I came up with some things. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more that they can do, right? Get it down, excuse me, get it down to a reasonable number of domain admins, number one. And then, so I love cracking passwords, and so my password recommendations are always kind of crazy, and people look at me like I'm kind of crazy. So 16 characters for everyone, and domain admins get 48 character passwords. And service accounts get 65. So that's the recommendation, right? If we really want to help Pretend Corp out, domain admins don't need easy to remember passwords because they shouldn't be doing domain admin things all the time, right? So give them insane passwords and make them put it in a password vault. So there's a whole list of remediation that we can give Pretend Corp here, right? It's easy because this is what we were trained for. Right? Walk into the dumpster fire, stare at the dumpster fire and be like, I can put it out, right? So this is straightforward and easy. Put out the steaming dumpster fire. So thought exercise number 3, they have a cloud-hosted application that serves their 5,000 customers. They only have 5,000 customers, but they're making $100 million a year. So some quick math tells us they got some really rich people paying for their view bots. So they must do a pretty good job at view botting, right? They must be pretty good at what they do. The application is running in a virtual machine running on Ubuntu LTS. They're using infrastructure as code. Look at that, pretty modern development practice. 443 and 80 are exposed, but also 22. So SSH is exposed to the entire world. Application has customer data, PII, and social media handles. So the people they're view-botting for, they've got their handles there. They have a DevOps approach. As we can see, they're doing some infrastructure as code stuff, but it's not formalized, so there's no pipelines, there's no place where we can inject on-demand security scans and stuff like that. They have no cloud posture management, so they know that there's stuff running in the cloud, but they don't know what is running in the cloud. And the site that they're running to serve up this beautiful view botting is WordPress with 100 customized plugins. So really cool DevOps, really bad dev. So we're running WordPress with SSH exposed to the internet. And their Docker containers are running with capsys-admin for anyone who loves container escapes like me. Yes?
Is there provisioning on that same cluster of containers?
Yes. So they are provisioned using containers.
Well, no, I know they're provisioned using containers,
Yep.
but is there Terraform or whatever running on that same cluster of containers as all of these VMs?
No. The question was, is Terraform running on the same cluster of VMs? And the answer is no. So they've actually segmented out their production application somewhat well from the rest of their infrastructure, but then you can also see we've got a host of other issues here. So what's the risk analysis? Again, this one is actually very straightforward. The risk analysis is wiping away the entire profit of the company in a different way. So we've got their cloud-hosted application is a dumpster fire. Their on-prem Active Directory domain or hybrid domain is also a dumpster fire. So looking at those two separate things and saying, these are both bad, they could wipe away our entire profit sheet in different ways. Because we could completely lose all of our data and or lose our entire cloud-hosted infrastructure easily because of the things that we're doing here. So we can wipe it all away. What are some of our remediations? Don't run privileged containers. They had CAPSYS admin going. Don't do that. No privileged containers. Invest in some cloud security tooling if you can. Otherwise, there's free stuff that you can use. Move the application. If you're going to stick with WordPress, which by the way you shouldn't, move it to a dedicated WordPress hosting. Don't host it yourself. Let them patch your 100+ plugins. Don't try to do it yourself. Okay, thought exercise number 4. They have an identity provider with 2 super admins of that identity provider. They require physical MFA, so YubiKey, TitanKey, whatever, for all employees into their IDP, and including their super users. The IDP has a URL naming scheme that's not obvious. So if you stumble across it, you wouldn't know what it is. You wouldn't know it belongs to Pretend Corp. It's not something that you can easily find. They allow connections from geolocations, even in operations, even in the areas of the world that they don't do business. So before we said no GDPR, because they don't do business anywhere but the US, but they allow connections from anywhere in the world. So this one's interesting. Is there risk here? Yes, there's some risk here. I said $100,000. I could go higher, I could go lower, either way. I said $100,000 because they're not restricting geolocation traffic, and they also need to get some awareness training for their users. So are people with physical multi-factor, can you still fish people with physical multi-factor, yes or no? Yes. It's harder, right? But I can still steal their authentication tokens if I can get a payload running on their machine. I mean, we've all seen it happen to identity providers that we won't name because there's no need to, but it happens, right? You can just steal their tokens after. So they need some awareness training. They need to do some things to button it up. So I said $100,000 of risk, but that's a manageable amount of risk and some things that you can do to wipe that risk down. Now, can we ever get the risk to $0? Before you read the slides, anyone? No, right? We can never get the risk down to 0. It's impossible. There's always risk. Different businesses are willing to tolerate differing amounts of risk. So you have to figure out with your stakeholders what's the appropriate amount of risk. Some businesses are comfortable with accepting large amounts of risk. And so maybe risk mitigation isn't one of your best strategies there. Maybe it's avoidance of culpability. I don't know. But you've got to figure out what's your effective risk mitigation strategy that you can perform based on the risk profile the company wants to carry. Now, they can only make an informed risk strategy profile decision by getting the right guidance from their chief information security officer, who's in the audience with me, can give them the right guidance of what's the appropriate risk profile for them to carry. You know, can they carry tons of risk because no one really wants to attack them? Does anyone know the answer to that? Anyone? No, right? And opportunity attacks are a thing. It's not just people going after you because you're the best view botter in the world. It's an opportunity attack. You may get hit just because. So we can't drop the risk to 0. How will this message be received the first time you bring this message to stakeholders? Very, very poorly. You're going to bring money, right? And you're going to say, this is the money that's impacted. it's going to be very poorly received. And I don't mean like you'll be kicked out of the room and fired, hopefully. If so, you don't really want to work there anyway. But Pretend Corp's going to come to you and say, holy crap, this is scary, right? Where are you coming up with these numbers? And you say, oh, here's the industry studies that we've been using. Here's the data that we have that shows this is what we think the risk is. When you come with the data and you come with the dollars, it's going to be a shocking moment, but you can get through it. The one caution I would give is don't use FUD. Who knows what FUD stands for? Yeah, just shout it out. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? Brokering in FUD is super easy and sometimes super fun, but it's counterproductive. Because you can be like, the world's burning down and we're going to burn with it if we don't do this thing. And you can only do that so many times. So don't do FUD. Do real talk. Talk about the things that matter and then impact the business. Don't broker in FUD, because the FUD runs out and then your ability to get effective changes runs out with it. So don't broker in fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Get the message across effectively. And my one recommendation is always bring remediation, even if the remediation is more expensive than the risk, right? So they may come and say, yeah, you may come and say, we have $50,000 of risk. Here's how we can remediate it. It'll cost us $250, right? And then they'll say, well, we don't want to do that. Okay, cool. But at least you've come and you've shown that you can remediate risk. You have effective ways of doing so. Try to make it cost less than what the outstanding risk is, but always come with remediation. Even if the remediation is, shut it down, right? Sometimes we have to do that. The remediation is just shut it down and don't ever stand it up again. Okay, and that's all that I have. Does anyone have any questions that I can attempt to answer? Yes. Yep. For the what part? Say that for me one more time. So the impact to the business. Oh, reputational. Okay, that's the part I was missing. Yeah, the reputational part. That's hard. The best thing that I've been able to do with reputational impact is point to stock price and or brand trust of other companies that are in a similar space. You can always find companies who have had something happen to them. You can take a look at their stock prices. You can take a look at their brand trust. There are places that rank brand trust and say, okay, look, their brand trust went like this after an incident, right? And we have the data that shows that that's what happened to the brand trust. And that helps have that conversation, because brand trust is, your name means a lot in the industry. And so you can link it to what others in your same industry are doing. Now, if you're one of a kind, like Pretend Corp, well, there's other people that ViewBot, but Pretend Corp's the best at it, right? It's kind of tough to do that. And so you've got to try to go back to money and tie it into reputation. Does anyone else have their hand up? Yes.
So Pretend Corp's kind of small.
Yes.
What would be your recommended approach for, a bigger company, maybe Fortune 500?
My best recommendation is social engineering. You find your way to socially engineer the stakeholders. You show them that you can be trusted based on real data that you have, and you build that trust over time with the data that you have. So start small. Start by saying, hey, here's these things we can do that are quick and easy, and if we do this, we reduce this large amount of risk, right? Find the easy, quick wins, but always bring the data with you. And then when you bring data, people will start trusting your data. And the more they trust your data, the more they trust you. So socially engineer them without them even knowing. Build that rapport, and then all of a sudden, when you come to them with the big sticker items, they're like, oh, I've seen you do that before, right? CISO at Pretend Corp, you've done this before for us 5, 10, 15 times. So social engineering is your best friend. And what I would say is make yourself available as well. Let people know that you want to consult them, that you want to be an advisor to them, even if that means having difficult conversations. Because when you get up to the stakeholder level, difficult conversations happen all the time. Be okay with those difficult conversations. Sometimes, you get through in these days of remote work, it's kind of nice because you can sweat profusely off screen, right? You just put the camera up here, sweat profusely, and then go for a walk after. But but get used to those difficult conversations. Does anyone else have their hand raised? Yes.
Three questions. I don't want to monopolize, so one at a time. First, for piece three,
Yeah.
okay, okay. It seems like the only real risk is this, losing all of this PII.
Yep.
It's because we can stand things back up in 2 minutes.
Yep.
How would we get the 2.5? How do we do the math on that? How do we get to, 4.5 million from the loss of PII versus, why is that not 10 million?
So
Why is that not 2 million?
So I went with the average for this one because losing your PII, losing your PHI and identifying your users as being view botters, the reputation damage to your company would bring you up to the threshold of the median of what it is. Because if you're not familiar with social media, if you're view botting, you can get banned, right? And so if I leak every single handle of all the people that are paying me quite a bit of money, honestly, they're probably going to get banned. If they can go back and say, yeah, you're view botting, they're banned, there goes my revenue stream. Because if they're banned from their social media profile, they can't pay me anymore to view bot for them.
But the question is, let's say these machines instead of 2 days to stand back up.
Yep.
How do I justify increasing that 4.5 to 10 or 20?
Mean time to recover is a huge metric, right? If it takes us a week to stand this back up, it's going to erase everything. Because we can recover pretty quickly here, if the data leakage is the concern. If we couldn't recover, then it would be time spent in legal fees and all those other things multiplied by the time it takes to remediate. So you're right. That's a huge component of if we can remediate fast and we can move fast to recover, then we're much less risky. Cool. Yeah, go ahead.
The follow-on question is then, the accountancy guy, the CFO, is going to ask me for my math.
Yep.
He knows for the fire insurance, risk of fire is 1 in 10,000 per year.
Yep.
And damage with fire is 5 million.
Yep.
So he multiplies those against the risk. How am I calculating time to recover?
So I would calculate the cost of time to recover as hosting costs, engineering costs, multiplied by the time it takes you to recover, and then add the data that you've lost to it, referencing public studies that say, here's what it's going to cost you if you lose the data. Because the recovery part is actually a small fraction of the cost in the end, but the reputation damage and the lost data is the largest portion of it. So if there was no data on here that mattered, you could severely downgrade this, right? And maybe the answer is, if we're going to do WordPress, don't host any sensitive data. And I'm 2 minutes over time. Fantastic questions, by the way, thank you. But yeah, so it's all a sliding scale of what's the data, what does it mean? So if anyone else has any other questions, I'm going to step over there. Happy to talk about it. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.